everybody. It's me, Carmine DeStefano, the Bookman. And this line of commentary is for those who, kind of like my friend Scott from Superplex Music, or others like those who detract the Marvel Cinematic Universe specifically because they're not exactly from the comics, or anybody that is not really sure whether or not they should jump on board or what have you. I just want to go through a few things and a few reasons why, as a cinematic universe of the Marvel series fan that I am, and a fan of the Marvel comics, and somebody who's been reading a lot of comics lately, thanks to a specific website which I will not give just in case. I just want to kind of defend the decisions that were made over the course of the last 11 years since they started making these movies at an average of about 2.5 per year. And first, before I begin, I just want to say that anyone who denounces the Marvel movies but still talks about DC and Disney Star Wars movies as though they're movies and not just wannabe fan service collages to get the wannabe fans to say that they enjoy these movies and everything, you have no say in anything because you're not critics. You're fans, that's your business, you know nothing about movies, because if you like any of those broken disgraces of films that DC's been shitting out or Disney's been shitting out with Star Wars written above it, if you like those, then you have no concept of movies. So just be fans, enjoy, and take a step away. The adults are talking now. But anyone that is a real movie fan, you have to remember something. First of all, movies nowadays suck. They're horrible. There is not one artistic movie sense. There's not any comedic movie sense. Nothing about movies today is anything less and anything more than a bunch of rich assholes in Hollywood who have been born with money, who've always had money, who never earned a day in their lives or a dime in their lives, having free interns tell them, based on reports and analytics, what fans want, and they're just puking them out on you. That's what movies are. So, like, independent movies are just weird. The blockbuster movies are just Tom Cruise doing stunts. You know, like, everything is just sold out, slap on a plastic lunchbox, and now you're selling it. You want to sell it well. You know, every movie is just a joke. So all you really have for entertainment are the Marvel movies. And as a movie critic, someone who's written screenplays, someone who's studied writing and stories and stuff like that throughout pretty much all my life, as someone who's been critiqued by professionals, I can tell you that some of the Marvel movies are actually technically solid movies. They're not just good action movies. They're technically solid. And I always go back to Guardians of the Galaxy. The first Guardians of the Galaxy movie was just a technically spot-on movie. It really was. So that's one of the reasons why I kind of defend the cinematic universe of Marvel, because of the fact that I'm a big fan of good movies, and they're more or less good. They made some clunkers, don't get me wrong. Iron Man 2 and 3 were pretty bad. Thor Dark World, you're talking about mythology, and I was like, bleh, the whole time, and I'm a mythology nut. The Incredible Hulk, the original Hulk, was better, whether you like it or not. So there are some movies that they made that are stinkers, and there are some villains that they've made that weren't well represented. But be that as it may, the movies themselves hold up on their own, and as a continual universe, hold up really well together, especially. But when it comes down to the accuracy of it, and I just want you to understand that the characters themselves, and a lot of the things, especially after reading so many Ms. Marvel, Captain Marvel comics, I never saw Binary or Warbird in the comic. Well, I saw Warbird, kind of, but not really. Didn't read her as, you know, Carol Danvers. But as a big Carol Danvers fan, I could say that the elements of her character and the elements of her backstory and everything were represented really well in her movie, and her movie was really good. And when it comes to so many guys complaining about her place in the next Avengers movie, she was one of the leaders of the Avengers. She was, at least at one point, the strongest Avenger. She had a lot to do with intergalactic politics and defense. And if you're making a movie about the Avengers taking on Thanos, she has to lead them one way or another sometime in the future or in the present or whatever, because that was who she was in the comics. So you probably just have a problem that it's a woman doing it, but that's another story for another time. Whatever the case, there are some reasons why you can't do it exactly like the comics. Now, for those of you that don't realize, I did read the Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War comics myself. There's only one self here. And I can tell you that a lot of the elements, again, in the Infinity War movie were well represented from the comic. But here's the thing. The cinematic universe has been going on for 11 years. The comic universe has been going on for 50 plus years, as we know it, more or less. And there have been so many different variations, but the one that built up the Infinity Gauntlet and Infinity War crises in the comics, pretty much those two crises were blips on the screen. They weren't even that big a deal. It was Thanos doing whatever to impress Lady Death, and then them undoing it. And I don't want to give anything away in the movies because I have no idea what's going to happen with Endgame. But I kind of do, but I'm just saying if you never read the comics. It was basically he did something spectacular, extraordinarily horrific, and then everyone just undid it, and that was it. The Civil War, although it wasn't represented as well as they thought it would be, was a bigger crisis. For crying out loud, Captain America saying Hail Hydra was a bigger crisis that caused more of a rift, that lasted longer, that had more ripples in the river of time, more so than the Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War, from what I've read, from what I've seen. It's not like people knew that you can't mess around with the gauntlet and the stones. Yes, that was it, but I'm just saying in terms of relationships between characters and stuff like that, between heroes and heroines and everything. But be that as it may, it was something that happened. It was something that made people scared shitless of Thanos and everything like that. But Thanos could have been scary on his own anyway. But whatever the case, if you wanted to make it exactly like that, if you wanted to make it exactly like those two series, what you would have to do is you have to go back to it all over again. You'd have to make a good Fantastic Four movie, a good Fantastic Four series of movies. You'd have to introduce Galactus. You'd have to introduce Silver Surfer. You'd have to introduce the Watchers as more than just a cameo appearance with Stan Lee. You have to introduce the Tribunal as more than just a name in Doctor Strange. You'd have to introduce Eternity. You'd have to introduce Death. You'd have to have it that Death formed itself as a woman to impress Thanos. You'd have to have a backstory on Thanos where he killed everybody, including his mother, that was related to him because he was upset that they abandoned him, seeing as how he didn't look like them. You'd have to introduce Mephisto and probably Ghost Rider, because you'd have to introduce Doctor Doom, well, Doctor Strange too in a way. You'd have to introduce Doctor Doom in a format that would be a little bit more to the comics because of the fact that his mother was taken by Mephisto, her soul was, and you'd have to explain exactly why he is the way he is. You'd have to make a good Doctor Doom. That's something else. You'd have to make Doctor Strange more of an impactful character. You'd have to have Adam Warlock already. You'd have to have him fighting Thanos a few times already so you can understand their background. You'd have to include the X-Men. You'd have to include Hank Pym and Janet Van Dyne and all of them. You'd have to include all of them, and you'd have to make them all built up for the sake of getting their asses kicked. On top of that, you'd have to introduce Hercules, who should be Heracles because it was Zeus' son in the comics. You'd have to introduce all the elder gods, all the patriarch gods. You'd have to keep Odin alive. You'd have to introduce so many different facets, which would take overall about 25 years worth of movies. And something that you have to remember is, movies are not comic books. Comic books, you can sell 1 million of them, get more than your money back, and be a bestseller. You sell 1 million tickets, you're a bomb. Especially when you're talking about hundreds of millions of dollars used to make these movies. To make the money back would take way too much money. So you have to broaden the audience. Comic books originally were made for guys who wanted to see beautiful women, probably not put in fridges or had their guts eaten out by the Blob, but beautiful women flying around and doing whatever, and guys beating the crap out of each other, and just a lot of drama within the internal struggles and all that stuff. You'd have to make these comics designed specifically for young males, just for young males. You'd never make your money back. People like kids or specific women or older people wouldn't get on board with this at all. I mean, I know 60, 70-year-olds that like these movies because they're good movies. So in order for you to broaden the grand scope and the audience, you have to sort of dumb it down. I don't mean dumb it down by saying you're all stupid. I mean dumb it down by simplifying it. You have to simplify a little bit. You have to give people characters they can relate to and movies that you can build up on with specific elements that you think are the most entertaining and most wide, broadened, embraceable movies and concepts, everything like that, for the sole purpose of one crisis, one, that should be resolved. So if you looked at it as it was, and you're a big fan of Thanos and a big fan of the Infinity Gauntlet, Infinity War series, the Infinity War movie was pretty much the Infinity Gauntlet series. It was Thanos beating the shit out of every hero that you have available and wiping out half of life. What more could you ask for? That's what it was. So really, all of it built up and culminated to the point where the Avengers couldn't do anything to him, and that's it. And he snapped his fingers and everybody's gone. That's what it was in the comic, that's what it was in the movie. And there was one other point that I wanted to make, but because I'm old, I'm forgetting it. So, whatever the case, as I said, I just gave a defense towards the movies, the cinematic movies. And again, if you want to complain about how close they are to the original comics, I can sit here and say, well then Captain Marvel should have been introduced before Captain America Civil War. She should have been involved in that, along with others like Wonder Man and Spider-Woman, who were big factors in that as well. Where was Luke Cage? You know, where were the Defenders? Where were the Inhumans? Where were all those people in the Civil War series? They weren't there. So I could complain that, but I didn't. Everyone liked that movie. Well, most everybody liked that movie. And then I could say, well, then Fellowship of the Ring and Lord of the Rings shouldn't have won an Academy Award because it didn't have the Bower Wraiths. It didn't have Tom Bombadil, key factors in the story, you know. You can't really do that nitpicking thing, especially when you're trying to broaden your audience. So that's all I had to say. Plus, I'm bored and I have no projects. Can you give me some projects here? I'm dying. I'm fucking need something to do. Thank you all for watching. I have more for you soon to come. So stay tuned, take care, and have a great day. Seriously, move a little bit of these release dates a little earlier, please.